Happy to have you here. Happy Friday Eve. So last night here on the show, we talked about some worrying new hiring numbers, which seem just like a bad indicator of where the economy appears to be heading very quickly now that Donald Trump has taken office again. Those numbers from ADP, the payroll company, showed private sector employers hiring less than half the number of people they did last month, which was half the number economists had been expecting them to hire in February. That was very bad news. Now we've got new numbers, not on the number of hirings, but the number of firings. And those numbers are way worse. Quote, layoffs across the United States soar to highest level since 2020. What was going on in 2020? Employers cut more than 170,000 jobs last month. That is a...
And Rachel Maddow should be forced to resign. Nobody watches her anyway. I don't know if it's not possible they pay her as much money as I hear, but certainly she's lost all credibility, both of them. But what they said the other day, they should be forced to resign about that young person who is suffering greatly. Thank you.
245% increase from the number of layoffs in January. 245% increase. It's also the highest monthly number of layoffs since the height of the COVID pandemic in Trump's first term in July 2020. Now, that said, to be fair, there can be a seasonal component to layoffs and to employment numbers generally. Hiring and firing numbers tend to look different in the summer months than they do in the winter months, for example. So if you're really trying to get an honest grasp on how bad this outlook is economically as Trump's policies are taking hold, consider specifically that these are February numbers that we just got. If you really want to compare apples to apples, the last time we got February numbers this bad, it was actually February 2009. When Wall Street had collapsed and we were plunging into not just a national, but an international Great Recession. That's the last time firing numbers looked like this. That said, these are just indicators, and maybe they are wrong. Maybe these are outliers. We expect the official government monthly jobs report tomorrow morning. It's actually not expected to be bad, in part because a lot of the firings since Trump has been president have happened so recently that they may not be reflected in government figures yet. But we shall see, weirdly and worryingly, because the president and his commerce secretary have both started to make noises about messing with the numbers themselves, potentially changing the way the government's official economic statistics are actually compiled, presumably so they won't show bad news that looks bad for Trump. That is a whole new thing to worry about, whether they're going to try to cook the books on economic numbers like the jobs numbers coming out tomorrow. I don't think anybody expects them to spike the job numbers or pervert them somehow tomorrow. But we will have to wait and see what we get. Last night, we also talked about President Trump's new gift to America's veterans, the announcement that he's going to fire 80,000 people who work at the VA serving our veterans and providing them health care. Oh, you shouldn't have. Really? 80,000 people fired from the VA specifically? We learned about that last night. Today, NBC News has new reporting on what else Trump is planning to do to veterans. You know, if you voted to make America great again, did you know that would mean, for example, that Donald Trump would be cutting off the funding specifically to sterilize medical instruments in VA hospitals? Quote, the terminated contracts list includes contracts for a practice crucial to preventing infection in hospitals. Quote, the sterilization of medical devices and instruments needed during surgery. The list of contracts on the chopping block has not been made public, and the VA declined to provide it, but VA employees have identified 200 of the remaining scheduled contract cancellations to NBC News. That list includes, for example, contracts covering sterility certification for VA hospital pharmacy operations, also follow-up care for cancer patients at the VA, also accreditation for stroke centers, Also, the certification of VA pharmacies for making compounded medicines, which of course are commonly used, among other things, in cancer care. Another contract scheduled for cancellation supports the National Center for PTSD, which is a VA entity that is the world's leading research and educational center on post-traumatic stress disorder. They're cutting that. NBC reports that initially, as of just a few days ago, Trump had even tried to cut X-rays and MRIs from VA health facilities. You know, if you run MRI or X-ray machines in any hospital, in any healthcare facility in the United States, those are things that have radiation elements to them, right? Because of that, because radiation can be dangerous, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission requires that a medical physicist has to come in and ensure that these machines are putting out the right amount of radiation. They're not going to hurt either the patients who are being scanned or the people who are running these machines. But Trump zeroed out funding to do that. Zeroed out funding for the medical physicists that check the X-ray and MRI machines. If they went ahead with that, if they got rid of the medical physicists who check those machines, that would have resulted in every VA facility in the country losing its ability to operate its X-ray and MRI machines, losing any ability to do medical radiology at all. And since you can't run a hospital without a radiology department, that one contract decision by Trump would, by law, have shut down every single VA hospital in this country. So they announced that one, the getting rid of the medical physicists last week. That was the plan. Now that piece of it has been at least rescinded. But yeah, they really are still planning on cutting off funding to sterilize the instruments that they use for surgery. Because nothing's too good for our veterans, right? Or for our seniors. If you want to get disability payments through Social Security, you may need to do a hearing to establish your level of disability. Trump just cut off the funding that pays for medical experts to testify at disability hearings. After thousands of people were fired by Trump at the Social Security Administration, the Washington Post reports today, quote, delays in reviews of disability claims and hearings before administrative law judges are already starting. Quote, wait times for basic phone service at Social Security. Those wait times have grown in some cases to hours. Hours-long wait times when you're calling Social Security for help right now. We're also seeing record wait times at the entrances to America's national parks, like this more than 1 mile long line outside Big Bend National Park in Texas on President's Day weekend. This happened right after Trump fired roughly 1,000 employees from the National Park Service just last month. Today, the New York Times reports that the Park Service just got in new data that actually shows some great news about last year. Last year, America's national parks had more visitors than ever before in U.S. history, which is great for last year. But they also obtained an internal Trump administration memo from this week saying they will not be publicizing this news about record attendance at America's national parks because, well, that's an awkward thing to brag about while you're firing all the people that work there because supposedly they're not needed. The National Parks Conservation Association telling the Times today, quote, the National Park Service just reported the highest visitation in its history as the administration conducts massive firings and threatens to close visitor centers and public safety facilities. America's national parks are really popular. Firing the people who work at the parks is not popular. So they're trying just not to talk about those two things in the same sentence. But none of the stuff that they're doing is popular. I mean, the Wall Street Journal now reports that Trump has an executive order that was ready to go as soon as today to shut down the U.S. Department of Education. Shutting down the U.S. Department of Education is wildly unpopular among the American people. The latest Reuters Ipsos poll asked specifically, should the U.S. close down the Department of Education? 32% said yes, 66% said no. By a more than 2-to-1 margin, Americans say, don't shut down the education department. Do Americans feel strongly about that? Yes, they do. Americans who strongly oppose shutting down the education department, outnumber Americans who strongly like the idea by a 30-point margin.
I'm going to be totally honest. I don't know what's really going on. Which front should we look at? If we look at the economy right now, with all of the ELON cuts, it's not leaving things particularly healthy, especially with various different medical assistants. From what I can work out, this is just the outside looking in. Those who need Medicare, Medicaid, etc., are going to be in trouble. And I suspect, I could be wrong, some of those people who will be in trouble will be lower earning MAGA supporters. But it doesn't seem to have actually touched base with them. It appears that they're still very happy that the administration is doing the thing of owning the libs with all of the, well, it's cultural politics. That's the best description. Number one. Number two, Ukraine. Now, I find it incredible the fact that there's a possibility that those who escaped what was going on in Ukraine were offered visas in America may have their visas revoked. No fault of their own, just pure politics. In any other language, that would be called collateral damage. It is just, what is going on there? And then the other thing is this, well, it's a level of sheer hypocrisy, contradiction, two-face. Al Green, during the State of the Union, he did, let's call it a Boebert stroke Marjorie Taylor Greene, who interrupted and jeered Biden. He didn't really have a hearing or anything. It's called, I suppose, freedom of speech. Weirdly enough, Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend actually came out this, what day was it? Thursday, and said he didn't agree with Al Green being booted out for expressing his opinions. Because this is the way I see it. So, Squeaker Johnson, etc., I don't think that guy's serious. He's all for it. Now, in the present terms, yes, the Republicans have control of the House and the Senate. But let's go down the line. Once it starts, how are you getting that genie back in the bottle? Really weird thing to do. Now, of course, the President of the United States of America is known for insulting people. Thin-skinned, because the way it works, you're not allowed to insult anyone that's MAGA. Anyone that happens to be a supporter of Trump can't say anything. But they're allowed to dish it out. Now, Nicole Wallace and Rachel Maddow, he needs his enemies. That's the thing. All the sycophants doesn't really care about. Trump needs enemies. He needs to have somebody to focus his anger or frustration on. Today it's Nicole Wallace and Rachel Maddow who made a comment. Well, they made comments after the State of the Union. I mean, everyone's got their opinions on that. But it's now being blown out of proportion, where he's basically saying MSNBC, they're not going to do it, should fire Rachel Maddow and Nicole Wallace because they made a comment that he didn't agree with. Many people may not agree with comments that Judge Jeanine Weinbox makes on Fox, but I don't think we've ever asked for her to be fired. But of course it doesn't really matter, because this is where we find ourselves in 2025. And the last thing I would say is, I have no idea what day it is of this administration. I know we're in double figures, and I know we're past day one. Am I wrong? I could be just wittering on here. I could have sworn he said on day one, so many different things were going to happen. Did he mean day one plus 100, day one plus 35? What is actually going on here? The only thing I will say that he got wrong, and I think I will improvise here, on day one, fake news, worst impression ever, on day one, Elon Musk will assume position of running the country of America, vice president and in charge of whatever he likes to do. I would say this, though, who actually is investigating Elon Musk? Because are we saying, because he has so much money in the world, it's the only person in the world who has never done anything worth any government anywhere having a look into? Just asking a question. Love to know your thoughts. Comment section now.
For the record, the worst inflation in this country was in 1980. For the record, the economy that he was left by President Biden was not a catastrophe. It was literally the best economy in the world and was described by The Economist magazine as the envy of the world. That was the economy that was left to Donald Trump by Joe Biden. For the record, Social Security is not paying benefits in large numbers to 300-year-old people or 250-year-old people or 200-year-old people or 150-year-old people. In fact, the idea of Social Security as a bastion of massive fraud and overpayment is completely false. For the record, U.S. auto company CEOs are not psyched and delighted and so excited about President Trump's economic policies, including his tariffs. Take, for example, the CEO of Ford, Jim Farley, who said that Trump's tariff policies would, quote, blow a hole in the U.S. auto industry that, quote, we've never seen. The president flat out lied about U.S. versus European spending to support what used to be about $125 billion to Ukraine's defense. Europe has committed about $259 billion. The president radically misstating the character and quantity of our relative support for what used to be our ally, now appears to be only Europe's ally and no longer ours. For the record, Joe Biden did not close over 100 power plants. There were more utility-sized power plants up and running in the United States when Joe Biden left office than when he achieved office. For the record, there is no EV mandate. For the record, oil and gas production in the United States hit all-time records under President Joe Biden. For the record, even DOGE has never claimed that they have saved hundreds of billions of dollars in savings. The largest items they have claimed to achieve as savings in the U.S. budget have been debunked and they've been taken down, but even they don't falsely claim hundreds of billions of dollars worth of saving. For the record, and this is disgusting, the president made a spectacle out of praising a young man who's thus far survived pediatric cancer, as if the president had something to do with that. This was in the midst of him praising DOGE. The DOGE cuts, among other things, have cut off funding for ongoing research into pediatric cancer.
Shopping mall here, and I'm intrigued about something. Day one, that was the line. On day one, the economy was just going to be so robust, it's untrue. We're on quite a few days, by the way. Where are the green shoots? Look there, whole load of empty chairs. That kind of represents the economy at the moment. It is crashing. What is going on? Is it affecting you? Who actually really did think that on day one there was going to be a recovery, that something was miraculously going to change? Because as far as I can see, nothing changed at all. Like absolutely nothing. So, comment section is all yours. How do you actually feel right now? Have you spotted any of this recovery? An interesting thing is, whenever anybody from Team Trump is now appearing on cable news, they're melting down. Money, 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 no money.
A talking point that these are sob stories. These are, again, people's livelihoods and also the health of this country, right? They have some of these mistakes that people keep talking about are gutting our agencies that are taking care of, I don't know, paying attention to the bird flu, Ebola, these things that actually can have detrimental impacts on the American people.
We have Ebola in the United States?
Well, we are helping the world be a safer place as well, Scott.
I mean, on the bird flu, Biden slaughtered all the chickens. I don't know if there's any left to kill.
Oh my
on that note,
come on, Scott.
It was a bloodbath. You all love that word.
You can laugh about this, but these are things that people are actually scared about. I mean, measles is coming back. There's so many things that are happening that our federal government
You're saying
makes sure.
Elon Musk caused the measles?
I'm saying what is happening in this government right now with Donald Trump appointing.
You saying Donald Trump caused the measles?
I am saying that what is happening in this federal government under Donald Trump, allowing Elon Musk and allowing all these people that he appointed to run this government like this, is actually making us unsafer for the American
Elon
people.
caused the measles. You heard it here first.
Scott
Not what I said.
Johnson, not what you said. Ahead, we're going to speak.
Some new data out just announcing layoffs released. Our senior economics reporter, Steve Leisman, joins us now with more on how much DOGE could be in tomorrow's jobs report. What do you think, Steve?
It's a tricky story here, but first let me tell you, Andrew, announced layoff in February surging by 245% to the highest level since the pandemic, with the Trump administration's efforts to reduce the federal workforce playing not the only, but the biggest part in that. The outplacement firm Challenger Gray Christmas, they're saying that announced February layoffs, not actual layoffs, but announced ones, rose to 172,000, up from just 49,000 in January. It's the highest monthly number since July 2020, the worst February since 2009. It was a mix of layoffs from the government and the private sector, including government at 63,000 announced. That includes federal workers and private government contractors. Retail, 45,000. Hit by cold weather, as we know, and tech, 22,000, with HP, Meta, and Workday among the tech giants we know that announced February layoffs. The DOGE impact was the top reason cited for job cuts, followed by market and economic conditions, and then bankruptcy. The bulk of government job cuts are likely too recent to show up in tomorrow's jobs report. Workers won't be counted as unemployed until their severance runs out. But remember, roughly 30,000 federal workers, they leave their jobs monthly in a normal month. So the hiring freeze announced by President Trump on day one of his presidency, that could mean vacated jobs won't be filled. That could create some negative numbers that could drag down the headline number even as soon as tomorrow. Now, Evercore ISI, in a research piece, suggests total job losses from DOGE could be as low as 50 if the government eventually gets back to hiring, or as high as 660,000 in a worst-case scenario created by what it calls DOGE policy uncertainty. They wrote, DOGE-related uncertainty over contracts and grants could have an additional paralyzing effect on hiring at employers exposed to those funding sources or in need of regulatory approvals from agencies that are themselves paralyzed by DOGE review. Now, most forecasters that I'm reading are settling on some kind of midpoint here between total job losses of 250 to 350,000. That's federal job losses, or roughly 20 to 30,000 a month. That would be a noticeable number, but the ultimate economic impact depends on whether the private sector finds jobs for those workers, Andrew, and can make up for those job losses.